Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose, at Thundergrunt Bob on all relevant social medias. And with me today is Jimmy, George, and Jamie Nash. And right now, Jimmy's going to introduce himself.
Hi, I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. My Twitter handle is at Jimmy R. George.
And now Jamie. Yeah.
I am Santa Claus. I don't know.
That's your Santa Claus voice?
Yeah, that's a horrible Santa Claus. I did a Santa Claus voice for Two Front Teeth because it was funny. The guy who played Santa had a really high-pitched voice because he was a martial artist. So I dubbed over, and it sounded like Yoda. Like it was a little like, if you hear me in it, it's like, I don't even know if I can do it now. Like, hey, boys and girls. I don't know. That's not Yoda.
I mean, you should just talk like that on this episode.
Like, ho, 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 boys and girls. Come on. Anyway, I did.
Yoda makes sense, though, Jamie, because you do have that voice that's kind of like around the Frank Oz, Ray Romano, kind of Harold Ramis type voice.
I can't do the Santa voice I did there now, but it sounded a little like Yoda. I think it was the dialogue I wrote for him because he was kind of given like, dialogue Yoda would give, not really dialogue Santa would give. But anyway, so go watch Two Front Teeth
streaming on
YouTube somewhere. That a really horrible copy that I put up just so people could watch it. What a Christmas special, or you could just watch the Red Letter Media roast of it, which is fun. We talked about that.
Yeah, we already
the Baltimore porn scene or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I'm Jamie Nash. I am a writer and what was I going to say? A writer and I was going to say script consultant, which I do, but that's not usually how I introduce myself at all. I was just mimicking Jimmy all of a sudden. Yeah. I was like, I'm just going to give Jimmy's intro. No, I'm also the writer of two Save the Cat books. Save the Cat writes for TV, and if you get it, I think a great Christmas present for your writers is the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. I think it's a killer Christmas present, but it's probably too late for you to buy it for your writer friends. So use your gift card to go buy it, because I think it's one of those books that like people wouldn't buy for themselves necessarily. They might be like, I want to get the more essential writing book or something. But if you bought it for them, and it was sitting around, they'd use it.
It's like a kick in the ass present,
I do. I think it would, honestly. I mean, I know I'm biased, but I think like if I got a book like that as a writer, I'd be like, oh, this is cool. So what you should do is go buy it right now and give it to everybody in your writers group. All your writer friends. Just make a little surprise. Go give them the book.
Did you just suggest every person buy like 10 copies?
Well,
that's amazing.
That's the thing is, once
this is a quote unquote ad-free podcast.
Right.
It's a workbook, so you need it for each project.
Right. No,
so
you're
10
right.
is not a bad idea. So just stock. Go get 10 of them. Have them ready. You won't have to go back and buy and get another.
Also,
one.
Jamie has Ninja Turtles comics for sale if anyone needs that.
Ninja Turtle comics. And I have a couple hot, like somebody actually offered, didn't they, via this podcast, like my Secret Wars. They wanted my Secret
somebody
Wars.
asked about that.
I don't think I ever got back to them, but I'd sell them. I have Secret Wars #1. I also had the one where Spider-Man was in the black costume. There's somewhere.
Jamie's not like Jamie's love of movies is secondary to him moving merchandise.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. It's so funny because at one point in my life, I just was like, nostalgia means nothing to me. It's just in a box. So I decided to just get rid of it all by selling it.
Right.
And I was like, if I can take a picture of it, then I don't need it anymore. That was
that's
is
an
my
interesting
self-help
theory there. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like I had all these old Dungeons and Dragons books that I sold, and they were like my childhood, but I just took a picture of them and I was like, yeah, I'm good. That exercised the demon.
Right.
I was like, at least I could show somebody the picture of my old D&D stuff.
We're going to get on topic, but I'll just say to add to Jamie's thing, I just sold a Rufus figure, an in-box Rufus figure from Bill and Ted on eBay for $80.
Oh,
hey,
so I'm pretty
Merry
happy
Christmas.
about that. I didn't even need to plug that on the podcast.
But we do have a Bill and Ted's episode.
We did do Excellent Adventures, so there you go.
We do.
So you go find that after you listen to this one. And this episode,
one day we'll have a Secret Wars episode. I'm sure.
Yeah, one day we will.
In the future.
Yeah. This episode, we are talking about Batman Returns. and we're recording this a few days before Christmas, and we are not going to discuss if it is or isn't a Christmas movie. That is not why we're here.
It's an
I don't want-
insanely dumb discussion.
Yeah, all those discussions are stupid. We're not having that discussion. We also did Die Hard, by the way. It is on the feed. Anyway, we're going to talk about 1992's Batman Returns. But before we get to our talking points, we're going to go around and just say our relationship to the movie and what we think. Let's start with Jamie.
Cool. So yeah, this movie. So I wanted to go back to the first Burton Batman movie to talk about this movie, because the first Burton Batman movie, keep in mind, I was in high school at the time, and it was a very different world. Like, in my high school, I was the only one really excited about this movie. Like, nobody else really cared. It was like, Batman? Yeah, who cares? While comic books had gained in popularity among a certain audience like myself and friends like me, they weren't like the kind of, like, my mom reads them, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
My sister, it just wasn't like that back then. Batman was like, oh, Batman movie? That's interesting. It was like that. Like, really? Maybe. I don't know. It just was a very different thing. So when that movie was coming out, I was kind of at the height. I've talked about this before, but I kind of was a Premiere magazine junkie. Like, that was the magazine that really hooked me into being like a kind of pop culture cinephile type.
I actually have a few of those, Jamie, like collecting them because they're really cool.
So
yeah.
I had a subscription. It was one of the, my father, I think, got me a subscription when I graduated from the 8th grade. So I had it through a high school, and it was I also used to pick up Fangoria and stuff like that when I transitioned from 8th to 9th grade. That was my gift, I remember. And I kept that subscription until Premiere, I think, was defunct. I kept getting it. And Batman was a huge story in that, they had a great article. They had great articles in that magazine. It was kind of a Rolling Stone style movie magazine. And I knew, as much as I could about Batman. Nicholson was huge for me. Keaton was an interesting choice, a controversial choice back in the day, but I was down with it. I was like, I'll give it a try. So when Batman came out, that movie was, first of all, that movie was huge and changed the landscape. It did change. It kind of said comic book movies are truly here, and these are a thing, and they're going to be a force to reckon with. So that movie was huge for me. I would say, getting to that though, I would say Batman Returns, I always recognize as a better movie. Batman, it's a little how I feel about Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, where Star Wars made more of an impact on me, and it's probably a more important movie. But I do acknowledge that Empire is a better, more sophisticated, more interesting movie. Now, the only nudge I'd give to Star Wars is a complete movie unto itself that doesn't need sequels necessarily, I don't think. Whereas Empire kind of only exists as a movie that's part of a series. It would be a weird movie by itself, if,
Yeah, right.
if you just dump that out there.
It needs both sides too, like to
It
kind of
needs
work.
both
Yeah.
sides. So that's in some ways why I do still think Star Wars and Empire are neck and neck in a weird sort of way. So Batman Returns always, to me, was the more complete movie, but the original Batman holds a place in my heart in a different way because it was just more impactful. Where this one was like, and I've seen the first Batman movie more times than I've seen Batman Returns. But the part I'll acknowledge about Batman Returns was it's a lot like Gremlins 2 and some of these other movies where the director has so much power, he gets to put his stamp all over the movie and his voice over the movie, where the first Batman movie, it felt like there was a wrestling match. And I mean, history has said this, interviews have said this, that there's this weird wrestling match where he didn't have enough power to totally put his stamp, but his stamp was all over that movie. But it was kind of like this 50-50 kind of split between like what it wanted to be, where this movie feels like it's exactly what it wants to be. And that's kind of what I love about it. So anyway, that's my spiel on Batman Returns.
Cool. Jimmy?
since we're talking about our relationship with the movie for context of everything we're going to say after, I guess I do need to mention the first Batman as well. So, the first Batman, I was 9. So Jamie was in, you said high school? Yeah.
He did.
Yep. I'm
So
sorry, I
he was,
muted
so
you.
I was 9. I always forget our age difference. So it blew my mind and was super formative. And like I had the Topps card set. It was the first. It's what got me into trading cards, not baseball, not football. Batman. You could get at the local gas station a pack of Topps 1989 trading cards for like 15 cents. And I remember like doing extra chores to get those, to get those dollar bills so I could buy like 4 packs of the Batman set.
Mhm.
And I had the toys, I had the VHS that I wore out so much that it couldn't be played. It broke. My mom helped me make a homemade Batman costume out of like black pantyhose. And my brother was the Joker. And that's how I learned. So I was 9. That's how I learned my dad was colorblind, because my dad was not understanding why we were buying purple stuff, even though he couldn't see it, for the Joker. And he wasn't understanding why my little brother, who was like 5, why his hair needed to be dyed green. Because he was like, what? The Joker's hair is brown, his costume is brown. And we were all like, what?
Wow.
And that's how I learned my father was colorblind. I didn't even know what that was.
That's crazy.
But in contrast, the second one, so it was very impactful to my child, life. The second one, by contrast, one thing that's special for me and no one else listening is I moved to Baltimore in 1991, and it was the first movie I saw in a theater in Baltimore.
This was your Baltimore baptism.
This was my Baltimore. So, and that being said, I distinctly remember 11-year-old me walking out of a jam-packed theater and everyone in the theater hating it. Everyone around me being like, that sucked. What was that? Like the public response around me was not enthusiastic about this. And I think we're going to talk about maybe why that was. And for me personally, I loved it, but I was at a place in my life where I wasn't begging for VHS tapes anymore. And I was getting into other stuff. So I didn't have it on VHS. And I think this might have been like, it used to air on TV a lot. Like during Christmas time, like with commercials, just like NBC or ABC, one of the big 3 would air it with commercials around Christmas for 2 or 3 years. And so I've seen it interrupted since then, but I think maybe this is like the 4th time I've ever seen this movie. So,
yeah.
And definitely the first time in my adulthood, and definitely the first time looking at it from a screenwriting lens. So it was very exciting to revisit it and just like see the level of craft that it has in it from a screenwriting standpoint.
That's great. I'm glad that that's kind of true, because that way you get to see it differently than I can. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I can't say I've rewatched it many times. Like it's probably when it first came out, I rewatched it a few times. But when I was rewatching it the other night, like I couldn't remember a lot of the plot, to be honest. Like that was new to me again. But I remembered every single line of dialogue, like all the crazy penguin dialogue bits. Like I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember that. I had them all memorized. So I must have seen it enough at least to memorize all the nutty dialogue and stuff
That
like that.
whiteboard, man.
Yeah. Is that everything, Jimmy?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
I'm the baby of the podcast, right? The 41-year-old baby of like yeah, so for me, I'm not going to talk about the first Batman, but maybe one day we'll talk about it for an episode.
Yeah.
But I do remember that coming out on VHS. I had that VHS and I wore it out just like you, Jimmy. But because of my age, Batman Returns was way more formative to me, because Batman Returns also, kind of like Jamie said, there was more cachet with the whole franchise. That's the thing that had the toys and the McDonald's and the and the cups and the everything. That was when the beast was all fully formed, right? So that was such a huge thing in my life. And that's like why I think it looms larger maybe than the first movie, which I still obviously love very much. I was gonna say when we did Matt Reeves the Batman on the show, I said that his movie, that as far as I was concerned, was my 9th favorite Batman movie. This would be my number 1 favorite Batman movie. Right. So I said that and I wanted to follow it up. One of the things I love about this, and this kind of responds to what you said, Jimmy, is that I love that this has been resurrected sort of in culture. Like, you wouldn't have known people felt like that back in the day with the way people talk about this movie now, especially online, and just there's love galore for this movie. It's been like sort of just like reevaluated and re-embraced. I think like, and part of that is the villains. I think, and a huge part of that is like Catwoman and her vengeance against a man's world and everything. You know what I mean? Like, it was so ahead of its time in '92, and now it's like it's hitting finally harder than I think it ever has. And with this movie, we'll get into a little bit about like the fact that it's a Batman movie, but it's actually a Tim Burton movie. But I would say this. I've said this before. I'm a big Superman guy, but I'm not the biggest Batman guy, and I'm not the biggest Spider-Man guy. But like, I love the first 2 Burton Batman movies, and I love the first 2 Raimi Spider-Man movies. And I think like my defense on that against the source material is I don't care, and I just like good movies, but I don't care about the source material at all. Like, you know what I mean? Like I know there's a lot of like criticisms thrown at Burton's movies for how they apply to what Batman is and everything. And that doesn't bother me because I'm just kind of here for them being great movies, great, interesting, gothic, weird movies. What were you gonna say, Jamie?
I was gonna say that back in the day when I used to talk about this kind of stuff, like the Batman stuff, and this comes after Frank Miller in the 80s,
right,
and there was all this kind of stuff that changed comics in some ways forever. But I grew up, my first franchise, I think I said this on that last Batman podcast, the first thing, like my earliest memories were Batman, Adam West Batman.
Sure, yeah.
That's like my earliest memories, is having those toys and watching that show. So I used to get in debates with people, and I used to say, I don't think there is a definitive Batman. There's takes on Batman.
Right.
There's Adam West Batman. There's the Batman comics I grew up with in the 70s that were a little different. They weren't really dark and brooding and like, he has a mental illness and he has vengeance and sadness. It was just more like he was like, this hero. He was closer to Superman at times.
Right.
Or Super Friends. I grew up on Super Friends. That Batman is different than the brooding Batman.
Right.
So, and then Tim Burton's Batman is different, and Reeves' Batman is different. Nolan's Batman is different, and they're all different.
I wasn't trying to remotely say this is the definitive Batman. I'm saying it's my favorite Batman movie.
Yeah.
I know that you didn't think that, but I just want to clear that up.
I was kind of agreeing with you because you were, not that you really said this, but you were saying you don't care about the source material. And I think it's the take on the source material. I think the two are in combination.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I
agree.
mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to maybe Superman in some ways.
I'm definitely a stickler on Superman. I admit fully.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think, I mean, this is one of these things that people will fight me on. I just don't think the takes are, I don't know. I don't think there are definitive weird takes on Superman like there are on Batman.
Right. No, I agree. I agree.
It just doesn't feel that way. But Batman, there definitely are takes.
Batman is so much more. He's one of the most malleable superheroes there is. Easily.
A friend of mine, a guy I write with, Pete Barnstrom, sometimes, he and I used to talk about Batman a lot. And his take always was, dressing up in costumes and stuff is a really silly idea. So if you don't have at least some silliness in your movie, you're just missing the point, And I think that's why I like Burton and Adam West and stuff, because there is an inherent silliness that, at least at the time, I was like, it needs it. I think it's been proven that you can do Marvel movies and not be quite as silly, But also, there was something silly about Batman.
Like to frame the first two Burton movies, like these are the first gritty reboots. As in the culture's mind, Batman '89 was a gritty reboot of Adam West. Pretty much, it was like and that's been
following the dark take on. It's got all this whimsy and circus music, and it's
it's silly
kind of
now, but it was like
yeah,
super fucking dark back then. Like
it,
I was reading people's reactions for this episode, and the
sure,
amount of anger at how dark
yeah,
this movie was
yeah,
Mhm.
palpable from the families and parents and stuff. Like they were mad about it was
Yeah, and that
sexual
was
and
the
dark,
reaction I
killing
remember
yeah,
kids.
people
It's like
being
it
like,
opens with like some kind of an abandonment of a child down a sewer, and then there's a
right,
plot about him murdering children in their beds. Like
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
they were mad about how dark it was, but now
Him,
you ask them,
him
you
eating
ask,
a raw fish or
yeah,
something,
right.
and swallowing a
I mean,
bird,
yeah,
or all
he
that stuff.
bites that guy's
he's
nose.
Yeah,
offensive to the senses in every sense of the word, right?
right,
But
right.
Super sexual.
I've talked to any of my younger friends, my younger friends that are like maybe 10, 15 years younger than me. You talk to them and they view this movie and the first one as silly.
Yeah, that's
Camp. They view it as camp. So that's weird, right? Like it's like
I,
for us, we view it as like this like progression of darkness, and for them, they're like,
yeah,
oh, that's all silly, you know.
yeah. I,
But
I
but under a
for whatever
microscope, this
reason,
movie is not silly, in my opinion. It is,
for
but it's
whatever,
not.
yeah, for whatever reason, where I was in my life, I always viewed it as a little silly. I always thought it was a little goofy, in a
It's got
good
a
way,
penguin
in a way I
army.
like.
It's got a penguin,
Yeah.
with rockets
Now,
on their
now
back. So
keep in mind, probably during this time, my favorite filmmaker when I was at this age was Terry Gilliam.
right.
So to me, it just fit right in with kind of some of the stuff he was doing in some ways.
And no, let me
But
say,
yeah,
like, one last thing I want to say is the watching it for the episode. The thing that I wanted to say is that it's so extremely ahead of its time with the Catwoman stuff, but also, man, this movie is such an anti-capitalist movie, like hardcore. It opens up with showing like the elite upper class and what they're actually like behind closed doors, which is
yes,
they literally throw their child away because they don't want to be seen with it. And then
Mhm.
yeah, yep,
everything with Max Shrek, literally his pollution subplot line, and him
yeah,
him saying, I wrote the line down because I wanted to say this. One can never have too much power. If my life has meaning, that's the meaning. You
yeah.
know, like
Well,
it's
Yep.
so palpably relevant
I
now. Like
yeah,
it's
I think
ridiculous.
I think It's a Wonderful Life taught us that if it's a Christmas movie, it has to
It
be
has to have that.
anti-capitalist.
No, Max Shrek is the Mr. Potter of 1992, right? Like,
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
right. So it's like under a mic. You guys know I've
No,
watched.
greed is the sin.
Right, you guys know I've watched this movie every Christmas, every year for like the last 30 years, right? But like watching it for the show, I always reevaluate it for what it means today more instead of just going through the motions. And man, it's just like it sings now louder than it ever has for me.
Mhm.
So that was cool. It gave me that little bit of extra value that I already didn't know it had, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I love it even more now just for watching it for Writers Blockbusters. So there you go.
That's
Cool,
awesome.
Yeah.
cool.
The one thing we didn't talk about, Bob, is that this is the first one on your list.
Oh yeah, right. Well, do we
Yeah.
usually say that?
Yeah, we always do. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, we all three of us wrote down 10 movies that we wanted to do to fill in holes when we don't know what to do. This is the right? That's the truth.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
This
yep.
is the first movie we're doing from my list, which is I
Yes.
chose this because obviously I love it. And, I thank you thank you guys for doing it, and I'm
No.
glad you also seem to love it too. So,
Yep.
No,
And then
it's-
the next one's Biodome.
Yep.
So
we're gonna do Biodome, then In the Army Now, and Son-in-Law.
I actually think comparing two Pauly Shore movies, one that's good and the other Biodome, is a great.
I love
that would be a
Biodome.
great episode.
So yeah,
what's the good one? Encino Man? I don't know. What
I'd
the
say
good one is.
Son-in-law.
Man,
I say Son-in-law.
Son-in-law.
Son-in-law's
I
the
think
good-
Son-in-law. We should do some Thanksgiving.
Son-in-law is a
Definitely.
quality movie if you can handle Pauly Shore.
It's a great yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's like I understand a human being not being able to handle Pauly Shore, but if you can, I think it's a great movie.
Okay.
I watch it every Thanksgiving. Anyway,
Okay. I like it. I like it.
I like we're talking about Pauly Shore.
We're gonna force Jamie to watch Pauly Shore.
Oh, I
movies.
love it.
I've seen them all. I just once though.
Yeah, right. So Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Yeah. So this particular script, I now I should have looked up. I can't remember the guy who didn't get credit. Do either of you remember the guy who didn't get credit?
I don't.
It's on Wiki. I forget his
I
name.
can look it up.
Yeah, look him up.
We saw that thread today that had like 4 different writers before the actual credited.
So I'll give you a little bit of the history. So Sam Hamm wrote several drafts or a draft that had Christmas in it, and it had Catwoman in it, and it might have even had the Penguin at one point. It also had Robin and all kinds of other stuff in it. And Tim Burton was reluctant to do a sequel. Tim Burton was like, he didn't really like sequels. He had kind of that old-fashioned 1970s kind of mindset, I'd say, like a lot of the filmmakers had. Like, unless you're going to do something totally new, don't do it. Don't do it. So eventually they convinced him that it could be more of a Tim Burton movie than a Batman movie. And he had some requirements. He didn't want to have any attachments like to the original movie. So Robert Wuhl was gone, sadly. Vicky Vale was gone.
Jamie's a huge Arliss fan. We can tell.
I'm a huge Arliss fan. What's that show he did about history? Did you ever see that?
I don't remember.
No.
Robert Wuhl's History or something.
Also, Jamie, on the Wikipedia, it just says Sam Hamm was the only other writer.
Yeah, you got to go into the production. I'll talk about I'll talk about the unnamed person in a second.
Okay.
So Burton brought in, he didn't want any attachments to the original, like as far as plot or anything like that, the Joker or anything. He didn't want, like, I think Hamm's script might have even explained like a little bit more about who hired the people that shot, Bruce Wayne's parents and stuff like that.
And Kim Basinger was basically the second lead in the movie too. I know that from reading for this episode.
Absolutely. But so he really wanted to distance himself from the first movie. He was like, let's not bring in any of those old plot lines or anything. Obviously Keaton would be in it in Batman and that, but other than that, it would be a new story.
And Alfred,
new characters, and Alfred as well. So he brought in Daniel Waters, and that's my Baltimore accent. So it's the word I can't say other than Waters. But he brought him in, and we've talked about him before. I'm trying to remember. Demolition Man, I think he's done.
Heathers, The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, Hudson Hawk, Batman Returns, Demolition Man.
Yeah, I talk about writers who I wish I was or wish I had their careers. And I say when I was setting out, he was one of those. I looked at Heathers and I was like, Heathers, and then Batman Returns, Demolition Man. This is the kind of trajectory I wish I had in my career. I never lived up to it, obviously. But he is one of those benchmark writers that I looked at, and he was hot. It was like when we talked about Andrew Kevin Walker for Seven, and he got applied to Sleepy Hollow and all these other things. He had a similar trajectory. It was like they come off kind of a smaller, more personal movie that they crafted, maybe a spec, and then they get applied, their style and tastes and stuff like that get applied to all these other things. So he was brought in to do the Burton version of the movie. And for me, I think Burton's fingerprints are all over. I'm sure he was involved, like with all kinds of and I don't know the ins and outs, but I'm sure he was involved in the brainstorming. And this movie, it has Nightmare Before Christmas in it. It has Edward Scissorhands in it. It has so much stuff that's just all over Burton's career that it just seems like
thematically
impossible.
Too. We're not just talking visuals. Like thematically, it's very Burton. Yeah.
It's because it's really all about sympathetic monsters in some ways.
It's like freaks, rejected freaks from society.
Rejected freaks. Yeah. I mean, it's so Tim Burton. It's like insane how Tim Burton this movie is.
Yeah.
In some ways, it might be the most Tim Burton movie of Tim Burton because I think not only is it about those things, but it's also like a 3-ring circus. It's wild and crazy and it has multiple storylines. Whereas some of the other movies like Edward Scissorhands, they're so almost simple in their storytelling. I don't know. This one's so chaotic, but it all works.
This is our second Burton episode, right?
We did Pee-wee.
Yeah.
Anything else?
We never did Beetlejuice.
That's it.
Yes, it's just that.
We did Planet of the Apes. No, we didn't. No.
Next episode, Planet of the Apes, 2000, whatever.
So yeah, exactly. That's on my list. That's number one on my list.
That's Jamie's number one.
Jamie's entire list
right.
is Tim Burton from 2000 forward.
That's right. It's the later Tim Burton. When we get to Dark Shadows, I can't wait. I got some good takes. So they replaced the Heathers writer with this other writer who I can't remember. Look him up in Wikipedia. This is where the interactive audience part comes in. And then he came in and did some drafts and was on set the whole time. And it was actually kind of a surprise he didn't get credit.
Jamie, was it Wesley Strick?
That's it. That's it.
Okay,
Wesley Strick.
I found it. Yeah.
And apparently he did a ton of work, and it was kind of surprising that he didn't get anything. But I think that probably had to do with the fact that they did give Sam Hamm credit for his initial foundational work, like with the Christmas plot and, you know, and Catwoman and all this other
Strick's
stuff.
credited with being a script doctor for Batman Returns, Face Off, and Mission Impossible 2.
Yep. And then apparently he was on the project for a while, and throughout production, he was the writer. Because probably the Heathers writer was busy doing 50 other like $1 million gigs, you know, because he was probably the hot writer in town at the time. He'll actually message us after this. He was like, I never made $1 million. So, and then box office wise, always my favorite portion of the program. Batman Returns was the #2 worldwide box office movie in 1992. It made $266 million, almost 267. Aladdin was the #1 movie at $346 million. Another movie I wouldn't mind doing one day.
Definitely.
Home Alone 2 was the third biggest movie at 173. So a big drop off, you know, about 100 million drop off. And just to round it out, Lethal Weapon 3, A Few Good Men, which is kind of shocking that that's #5. You know, that's how big that movie was. Sister Act, a movie we'll probably do one day. The Bodyguard, another movie that was pretty good. Wayne's World, we've done.
Yeah.
Basic Instinct. Still haven't done a Verhoeven movie, have we? Have we done one?
Well, no. RoboCop is on my list.
It's on Bob's list.
And obviously,
Sister Act is on my list.
Right.
By the way, I have
Sister Act.
I'm staring at a RoboCop replica gun that's also for sale. If you'd like to purchase it.
Wait a minute. Why didn't you tell me first before you're selling it to the audience?
It's sitting right across. I'll break it out for you.
I mean, I'm sitting. We don't do video, but this is a RoboCop poster in the shot that you guys can see right here. So
it's one of the last like fancy replicas I actually bought was a RoboCop replica gun. But anyway,
from the 2014, it's from the 2014 remake, of course. But go ahead.
That's right. It's a used prop.
Right.
I bought it for $10.
Right.
Set used prop. A League of Their Own, which we've done. Unforgiven. We've done Unforgiven, right?
No,
we did.
We did League of Their Own.
Oh. Okay. Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Under Siege. We totally need to do Under Siege. Patriot Games, Bram Stoker's Dracula, White Man Can't Jump.
We should do that.
Last of the Mohicans, Boomerang, Scent of a Woman, Crying Game. Top 20. 1992.
Okay.
Oh,
that's a good list. Well, you guys want to talk about the log line?
No, I'm good.
Okay, never mind.
That's it.
Thanks, everybody.
Peace out.
Batman Returns.
I did my favorite part.
So I put this on the list because similar to the one we just did, It's a Wonderful Life. It's a very weird one in that it's kind of hard to put it into a single traditional, easy to understand log line.
For a different reason, kind of. In this one as well,
for a different reason.
Which will flow right into our next discussion, which is structure, I think.
That's why I put it on top of it. Yeah. So I'll read the Jamie, why don't you explain Story DNA, and then I'll read some of the log lines that are officially out there for this movie.
Sure. So Story DNA is a Blake Snyder concept, but on the flip side, it's a concept he probably adapted from somewhere. And when you talk about log lines, the rule is, and you'll hear different phrases applied to the same thing, but I'll give you the save the cat phrases. A log line needs to state a hero who's trying to achieve a goal. There's an obstacle in the way, and there's some huge life or death stakes if they win or lose. So if they obtain the obstacle, they die, or the universe explodes, or Gotham City is bankrupt, or whatever. So there's some stakes. So hero, goal, obstacle, stakes. They're the 4 components of a good log line and a good story.
Okay. So that being said, here's the IMDb log line, and then I'm going to read the Amazon log line, which is a little bit even smoother. And then we'll compare it to the actual experience of the movie itself. Okay. IMDb. While Batman deals with a deformed man calling himself the Penguin, who's wreaking havoc across Gotham with the help of a cruel businessman, a female employee of the latter becomes the Catwoman with her own secret vendetta. Okay. The Amazon logline for like to buy or rent the movie on Amazon. Okay. So it's probably Warner Brothers official, right?
Right.
When a corrupt businessman and the grotesque Penguin plot to take control of Gotham City. So there's only Batman can stop them, while the Catwoman has her own agenda. So there you go.
I feel like the experience of the movie is more the first one for me. I don't know.
So the reason
are we choosing our favorite one, or what are we doing?
No, the reason I thought it was a good starting place for this topic.
Neither is great.
Structure.
Neither is great, but
it's really weird because if you're making a Batman movie, you have to put Batman as the hero in the logline,
right?
But is Batman even the most active of stories of this? Like, it's even hard. Like, normally you'd say, well, Batman's involved in all the stories, but in some ways, Penguin's involved in all the stories too, you know, in some tangential way. So it's really tricky with this one. And I think what this one does is, and I'm not saying this is necessarily a good thing for you to do in your scripts. I think if this were not a Batman script, this one would get a lot of pushback from development, because it would be hard to pitch. It'd be hard to pitch. And if it wasn't Tim Burton championing it, I'm sure it would have gone through a lot of rewrites.
There's like for the logline too, the question of like, whose movie is it?
Whose movie is it?
I would argue it's actually the Penguin's movie.
I think there's a good argument to be made for that.
Yeah.
And there's really three.
It's a three-hander. Really?
It is a three-hander.
It's a three-hander because Catwoman has. It's weird. Like when I think about like typical story structure, and we think about the things that need fixing and stuff like that, Catwoman sort of gets the bulk of that time in some ways, like being the put upon secretary and stuff like that. The Penguin gets those two in a more epic sort of way, you know, in a more from the prologue on. And Batman really doesn't get much. I mean, he doesn't get much with that. So that's why it doesn't feel like it's his movie. It doesn't feel like it's setting him up like an important story. Because usually it's like, is this an important story in Batman's development? And I'm like,
I have an argument for that, but I want to save it for when we get down the line. I do have an argument for that.
It feels like it's the most important story for Catwoman and Penguin, and it feels like it's another small chapter in Batman's long history to me. Like that's what it feels like to me.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that either.
No,
you know,
no.
So
not that you were saying
only if you're trying to pitch it.
But I can see how people, but I can see people pushing back on that. Obviously, what you're saying, right?
Yeah, they're like, oh, well, people come to see Batman. They don't come to see these other, you know, whoever they are.
So I broke it down. I broke down a couple kind of important moments that we typically look for in our arc plot versus anti-plot stories in our traditional Hollywood arc plot story, which is what you would assume a Batman movie would be.
Right.
And that probably I'm hoping will help us just talk about the structure and the villains plans and stuff that we have next on the list. So a couple really interesting things that this movie does that you would never expect from a Batman movie. Batman doesn't say a single goddamn word, or Bruce Wayne, for 36 minutes.
Yep.
Number one, we have superior position. So for instance, let's look at that long line. It says, while Batman deals with a deformed man calling himself the Penguin, wreaking havoc across Gotham. So with the help of a cruel businessman. So here's the first thing. Batman doesn't know that. We know that. So that experience doesn't kick in until Batman aligns with what we know. We have superior position over Oswald being a threat to Gotham and being behind this gang, right? He knows there's a gang that resurfaced, but he doesn't know who's behind it. And it isn't until 40 minutes that Batman says to Alfred, I think he knows who his parents are, but there's something else. And even then, that's not he doesn't know what the something else is, but he understands that Oswald's like not trustworthy. And so then he's sort of on the, that's what I would call the lock-in, right? He's locked into his,
and that was a progression too, because he first sees him and he feels for them. So yeah.
Right. So that's the first weird thing, right? Yes, Batman's out there for a couple scenes in that first 40 minutes dealing with the crime in Gotham, but he doesn't, unlike the other movies, unlike your traditional Batman movie, he doesn't know who's behind it. You know, there's no figure he's trying to fight. And the Max stuff that Bruce is dealing with, the Max power plant plot, doesn't kick in for Bruce until after that 40 minutes. So he's not even sitting there worrying about the power plant plot in front of the audience. So it's really fucking weird. And then it isn't until an hour and 40 minutes at the masquerade where Bruce doesn't even discover it. The Penguin just attacks the party and he's like, I'm here to take all your firstborn sons and kill them. That's the first time that Bruce and Batman know what the threat is, what the villain's plan is that they have to stop. So that's like 75% of the movie before Batman really understands what the fuck is going on.
Right.
So it doesn't really describe the experience of either of those log lines. So that's what's interesting about
when I was watching, there's a couple things going on. So I do think there's like 3 or 4 complete stories that you could logline separately.
Yep.
And I think you could easily logline them. There was something that occurred to me. I honestly don't think I don't think Burton thinks like this at all. And I'm not sure that but when I used to read comics back in the 80s before Miller and now you get series that are almost planned to be movies. They almost know what they're doing. But they were ongoing. When I read comics back when I was a kid, they would give you just 22 pages of some little story that did loosely connect to the next story, but they weren't like all, it was more like watching television or something. That was this weird anthology where we'll show you a Penguin story and Batman will show up. And then the next one will be kind of about Batman. And the next one will kind of be about Catwoman's origin story. And we'll give you something. And they kind of they were complete unto themselves. They were complete in their sequences. And they always had cliffhangers that threw to the next part of it. So they just kind of keep telling you little pieces. And when I watched it last night, I was almost wondering if that's kind of what was going on here. I don't know. I might be stretching it a little bit to say that's what was going on.
Maybe giving them a little more credit than.
Yeah. But that was kind of the experience I had reading comics as a kid in the 80s. Like it wasn't like, it didn't feel like I was reading like act 1 of a story when I read a comic. It felt like I was just reading some random piece of some bigger puzzle, and then it would make sense unto itself. But next week it could be another random piece. I did.
So maybe the execution is because of the medium it's adapting. Basically,
it is a sequel too, right? Like it is literally part of the medium. It is. So
it is. One other thing I wanted to mention was, and this maybe we were going to talk about this later, but we can talk about it here. This was the first movie I remember that did the multi-villain thing. I mean, yes, Superman 2 had Zod and Gene Hack, had Luthor, but not in the same way.
Luthor was almost part of the cast, though, at that point.
He existed in the second movie already. He was already, so they didn't have to give the backstory. But this is the first one that introduced a long history of this, for better or worse, and it feels like once you get outside, the advantage this one is it really has 2 villains. I mean, Max is there, but he's more like the other.
You could argue Max is the villain.
Yeah, I think Max is the
you could, villain. But this one introduces 2, let's call them super villains.
There you go.
That separates it. Yeah.
To me, it feels like 2 is the number that's okay. And if you get to 3, you're in trouble. For all the movies I think of that when they try to do 3, and the one advantage this movie
Spider-Man
did
3.
have, Spider-Man 3, exactly.
I mean, yeah. You
But
could just go down the list.
Yeah,
I
we
don't
could
know.
just list them off, right?
Even in the, was there ever a time where they introduced 3 in the later Batman series?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
there was, right?
Yeah, we got
I'll be
Mr.
honest.
Freeze, Poison Ivy.
I'll be honest.
Bane.
My attention span in the Batman series drops off after this movie. Like I really didn't. I
Gotcha.
saw all the movies, but I might have seen them once.
I know
don't
him pretty
even
well.
Yeah. So I know, like, yeah, anyway, I know Jim Carrey and I know, Poison Ivy but I don't really know who was in what and stuff. It gets a little confusing for me. But yeah, so this movie, the other big advantage I think this movie has is not only is it only introducing 2 villains, like I think is the limit, but it also doesn't have to further threads from previous movies.
Mhm.
I think Burton was smart to do that, because now I think it supports 4 different subplots,
Yeah.
which I think there are 4 subplots
That feel fully fleshed too.
Mhm.
that feel
That's
fully
kind of the
fleshed.
miracle of the movie to me is
Yeah.
it
And
doesn't
they
feel
all
like
tie
anyone's losing
together.
out. It doesn't feel like anyone was skimped out on or something.
It doesn't feel like they have to do any either like retconning or anything to fit the old stuff with the new stuff. There's no sacrifice. Like he can tell the Penguin story and he can tell Catwoman story, and there's no sacrificing to try to bend in the, like, if whether Vicky Vale and Bruce Wayne are going to get married or something from the previous movie, or
Right.
some
No, yeah.
or Joker's vengeance plot coming back, or Palpatine's the father of Batman or something crazy. There's nothing like that.
No, you had villains plans drive the action on here around this, circling around this. And I think that's a great way to like really put your finger on why there's so much tension, why it's so exciting, why it works so well, despite it not being your typical hero goal obstacle stakes, because there's hero goal obstacle stakes ingredients within each of those things. Yeah.
Batman is like reacting to the villains' plans and the villains fighting each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's the movie is. I think that's dissatisfying to some people, but you can feel it in the movie.
He is an active protagonist once he's involved.
Once he's involved, but that takes so long to kind of get there. You know?
Like we got Max's secret plan for the power plant. We got Max's plan within the plan to make the Penguin the mayor.
Right.
You got Oswald's secret plan for vengeance against Gotham. You got Catwoman's secret vengeance plan against Max. And then you got Catwoman and Oswald working together to frame Batman. All of those have their own like hero goal stakes obstacles for Batman that are like, pull him into it. And they all are their individual conflicts that need to be solved, by the end of the story. So they definitely drive the action. It was a good point. Whichever one of you put that on there.
That was Jamie.
Yeah.
Good job, Jamie.
Good job, Jamie.
Of course.
No,
Jamie's patting himself on the back right now.
I'm trying to put it into words. Like Batman's sort of involved in this plot just because he's Batman. You know what I mean? Like he gets pulled in only because he's fighting crime. It's not because of something personal at first.
I think this is a good segue to it's not on the talking points, to that Save the Cat genre discussion I wanted to bring up, Jamie.
Sure.
Jamie, do you want to explain what those are, and then we can kind of go into it?
Sure thing. So Save the Cat genres they're not like what I would say blockbuster genres. That might be a very dated term, but they're not like comedy.
What's a blockbuster? What's the show
what's a blockbuster?
After?
It's a TikTok with a lot of views.
That's right. If TikTok only had TikTok has genres, but they're different.
Yeah.
They're different kinds of genres. They're like 2-person dance video genre or something. But the genres in Blockbuster were comedy and horror and thriller and drama. Where Save the Cat genres, and to this day, I wish you called them something other than genres, because I wouldn't have to talk about that. They're more like story patterns. They're more like common. It's like five patterns of stories, and there's actually 10 of them. 10 patterns of stories you always see. And the examples that I'll just quickly do, we talk about in this podcast a lot. Monster in the house. Most horror movies are monster in the house, where you have a monster, you have a house, you have a sin, and a hero is trapped in some quote unquote house, which could be metaphoric. It could be a prison. It could be a wasteland. It could be a house. It could be a bus. It could be anything. And they're trying to escape a monster that's there. You have buddy love, which is two people, a complicated relationship. They both learn from each other. So these are the kind of patterns we're talking about. And I think what Jimmy's about to allude to, and I'll let you take over.
Yeah,
is that there's some patterns in each of these stories that fit, not necessarily all the same one. So
yeah, I think because we do this episode to try to figure out what techniques are being used, why something is emotionally impactful when it might not be traditional, things like that. And I think what I learned from this is that even if you don't have like one type of genre pattern that you're trying to deliver the expectations of to the audience, right? So like what you described, the monster in the house has a very specific experience that comes with its own set of patterns and expectations that the audience expects from a movie. And we didn't even go into it, but Batman is its own genre that you make a list of all the things that you want to experience when you're watching a Batman movie. So one thing that stuck out to me is I think each of these characters is in a different type of movie.
Yeah.
within the Batman movie, right? So
right.
So here's my theory, and I guess I'll go and describe them. I'll describe the way that Blake sort of conconceptualizes the tool.
Is this you talking about the voice? Is that what you're talking about, the voice?
No, this is not the voice.
Or the complexity of characters?
This is neither. This is not on the list.
Oh, this is just completely okay.
We're still kind of.
I was recentering myself. Sorry.
Yeah,
this is not on the list, Bob. I'm throwing you.
Yeah, we're kind of talking about those four different stories.
Yeah, because we're asking ourselves like, why does it work even though it's not traditional arc plot with a log line that makes sense and Batman locked into a problem that he has to solve by the end.
Much like Tim Burton's characters, it's quite an oddity.
Yes.
It's quite an oddity.
So, what I think is that I think that each of these characters is in a different kind of movie within this movie. So they're all in a superhero movie, right? First of all, yes, we can all agree on that. And the way that Blake describes a superhero movie is, number one, the hero of your tale must have a special power. Number two, the hero must be opposed by a nemesis of equal or greater force. Number three, there must be a curse for the hero that he or she either surmounts or succumbs as the price for who they are. Definitely a superhero movie that they're in within all of these movies.
That almost applies to all three leads.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So it checks those boxes. So that comes with its own set of expectations. Number two, I think Catwoman and Penguin's plan to frame Batman creates what you were describing, Bob, earlier, a dude with a problem subplot. So a dude with a problem story is an innocent hero is dragged into the mess without asking for it. Or being aware of how they got involved. Two, a sudden event thrusts the hero into a world of hurt that is indefinite and comes without warning. Number three, a life or death battle is at stake for the continued existence of the individual, family, or society.
So Batman is a dude with a problem in this movie.
He's a Batman's a dude with a problem within this movie.
I mean, I even like was jotting down like log lines for these. Like, it's kind of like, after finding himself framed for a heinous crimes orchestrated by vengeful Catwoman and the power-hungry Penguin, Batman must navigate the perilous shadows of Gotham City to clear his name and thwart their sinister plot to tarnish his legacy.
Kicks in.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, and that's his story.
That's it. And then Batman's investigation of the Penguin is a different movie, which is the cop why done it. So the whodunit is described as a detective who does not change, but we do, is the number one thing. Number two, the secret of the case is so strong. It overwhelms the world with lures of money, sex, power, and or fame. We have to know why the crime is being done. 3, finally, the dark turn shows that in pursuit of the secret, the detective might break the rules, even his own, often the ones he's relied on for years to keep him safe. I definitely think Batman is in a whodunit movie.
Yeah, and that one's like, Batman must unravel the twisted motives behind the Penguin's emergence from the sewers, or something like that. Discovering a tragic origin story, or whatever, that the
Right.
deformed outcast, and
So
why
that's
he's got
there.
this vengeful crusade against the city,
We're super invested in him figuring out what we already know. We have superior position here. That creates tension. That has stakes and a goal and obstacles. It has its own built-in story DNA. And then Batman and Catwoman subplot is a forbidden buddy love story. And Jamie, you described the buddy love perfectly. It sounded exactly like them, right? 2 characters who have a complicated relationship and basically impact and change each other along the way.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's usually a complication, and the complication is one of 2 things. It's usually something that forces them to be apart, or it forces 2 people that hate each other to be together. It's one or the other. And I think in this case, it's kind of the Romeo and Juliet. Like, Batman's code and his duty, is in the way of love, and same with Catwoman has her own, needs in that aspect. So.
Okay, and then I'll describe a couple more, and I think they track, which is Catwoman's vengeance quest against Max. Sometimes you can combine these genres and make their own. Is a political full triumphant, which is basically like an innocent person gets embroiled in a political scandal and has to overcome the powers that be. And then she's also in a business institutionalized. And all these terms are coming from 2 books that are out there that are great. If anyone finds this interesting, and their Save the Cat goes to the movies, and then Save the Cat goes to the indies, which takes the same ideas and breaks down like 50 independent movies that play within these genre patterns and, teach you what you can learn from these movies that are basically like your comparables you're looking for. So let's see if the institutionalized tracks. So number 1, it's a story about a group or organization or business that is unique and powerful. The story is puts one person against the system's company man. Number 2, right? She's totally against Max Schreck. Finally, a sacrifice must be made, leading to one of 3 endings to destroy the power: join, burn it down, or commit suicide.
Yes,
I mean, that's Catwoman's story.
She just has a lot of. She can commit suicide several times. Those, right?
Exactly. She can do it 9 times. Right.
Right.
And then the last one that I wanted to point out is the Penguin's vengeance quest. A different one is a tragic midlife rites of passage. Usually these rites of passage are a positive thing, but you could twist it and make it a downer ending. And let me describe what a rites of passage story describes. A life problem from puberty to midlife to death. Universal passages we all understand. 2, a wrong way to attack the life problem. Usually a diversion from confronting the pain. 3, a solution that involves acceptance of a hard truth that the hero has been fighting inside, and the knowledge it's the hero that must change and not the world around them. And my argument is that Penguin starts the story wanting to find his parents, exactly the life problem that we all can relate to. We can't relate to being an orphan, but we can relate to wanting to know who our parents are. And then he says, I'm a human with a name, and he tries to humanize himself. And after the events of the story, by the end, he's literally screaming out loud, I'm not a human.
Yeah.
I'm an animal. I'm the Penguin. So he has a tragic rite of passage story. So I think, to me, this is what I learned the most from watching this movie is maybe if you don't have your standard hero goal obstacle stakes, you can tell little stories in between that all have their own log lines, and it'll still work if you can find a way to organically connect them. And I think that's what this movie does. So that's what I took from this the most. It was really surprising to me, at least. Yeah.
Very cool. Is that everything, Jimmy?
That's everything surprising that's not on the
that's not on the agenda?
talking points. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Whoops.
No, that was great. I loved it.
I was like, what are you talking about, dude?
It's fine. All that stuff tracks really hard, so it was great.
Yeah.
Okay, now do you want to talk about the voice?
Yes, this is Jamie's talk.
This is Jamie.
Yeah, so this movie, and I really don't, this is one of those topics that it's really hard to talk about in some ways. Like I don't have a lot of good talking points about it, but this movie just feels like a voice movie. It feels like it's a movie that is 100% Tim Burton's voice, like we talked about before. I know there's a writer involved, but one of the things I always say about screenwriting that makes it a little different sometimes than novel writing or something like that. Sometimes you're hired to write for someone else's voice. So like if you're a TV staff writer, for example, you're supposed to write for the show's voice, which is often the showrunner's voice. And a lot of times when you get hired to work with a director, you are hired to basically tee it up for that director. And especially when you have a director like Tim Burton, who just kind of has a style. It's almost like Tim Burton's a genre unto themselves. And what does that mean? Like, how do you write that? This is a weird, by the way, I wouldn't say this is the 100% answer to this, but something I came across in my career when I was trying to figure out voice, because a lot of people have different, voice is one of those things that hardly anybody has like instructions on voice. It's like, it's just a difficult thing to define. But one of the ways I almost thought about it was, who's the character that's telling this story? That was always the way I defined it. So Tim Burton telling the story and Quentin Tarantino telling the story are kind of characters in my mind. They're like different type of people or something. They might have a sense of humor. They might not. They might be kind of, some of them might be very cynical. Some of them might be very playful. And there's a certain character. And sometimes when I write, I almost assume these variations of myself that are, it's the more playful version, the more cynical version, the more serious version. And a lot of times that's kind of when I'm writing, I think about my voice in those terms. It's like, it's more natural. It's very instinctual. But when I kind of step back and think of it, it's almost like the side of me that certain character I might play a little bit. I might lean into a little bit when I write a story. And I think Tim Burton, just if you're writing for Tim Burton, you have to lean in hard to a certain whimsical, Halloween and Christmas influenced, Disney influenced,
Outcast,
postmodernistic, outcast something, I mean,
German expressionistic. Right.
Yeah. Hard to define, but I certainly know it when I see it. But yeah, this movie just has so much voice, and like how you find your voice and that kind of thing is, if you do have these kind of opinions, don't be afraid of them. Don't be scared of them. Lean into them. If you are like weird in a Tim Burton sort of way, that's the thing that's great about voice is if you lean into it, you're going to write things that nobody else can write. The downside is maybe nobody likes your voice,
or no one understands, one understands it. Yeah,
and I'm sure Tim Burton had that for a large part of his early career, but once he hit, and he was a thing. And but this is such a hard career. Screenwriting is such a hard career. Playing it safe never really is the 100 best bet. You got to stand out in some way, and it's usually not playing it safe. It's dangerous to give this advice because sometimes people will means just unstructured chaos is the right answer. That's not at all what I'm saying. But your personality, your opinions, your sense of humor, and your taste is ultimately what you have. And if you don't have any of those, or then good luck. Is kind of, so that's why you might as well lean into them and find out if you have them or not, and develop.
You're basically almost just describing being an artist, Jamie, at that point, right?
True enough. Yep.
I almost want to jump ahead to Circus Mare after saying that, because what I have to say seems like it ties in so hard with voice with Tim Burton's voice.
Well, Bob, everything that I have for the next two topics is all sort of intertwined with Circus Mirror. So
okay,
so I feel like
you want me just to set it off, and then we'll follow it up. So Circus Mirror, for anyone who hasn't listened to the show, and Jimmy, help me here, is when the protagonist.
I've never listened.
You're right.
Never listened.
Thank you, Jamie. Circus Mirror is when the protagonist and the antagonist are like a Circus Mirror version of each other, right? Especially the antagonist is the Circus Mirror version of the protagonist. Like, there but for the grace of God go I. They could be the same person, except for a few different choices or events in their life that separated them, right?
Yeah, it's more like just to take it one step backward.
Yeah.
If you're from a writing standpoint, you're sitting at a blank page. You're like, I got my hero. What is how do I construct a villain, and not just a villain, but other, forces of antagonism in the story that are gonna impact my hero the best possible way, from a construction standpoint. And the exercise is, okay, well, what does the Circus Mirror version
of him look, or them?
What are the negatives? What are the negative self-reflections, right? I mean, and relevant to the Christmas type of movie we're talking about. That's why A Christmas Carol is so timeless, because basically, like, everybody is a negative or positive reflection of Scrooge and his life and his choices. And so it pops so hard because, like, everyone he's seeing is like either the best possible thing he could possibly be, or the worst possible thing he could.
He also is a Circus Mirror of himself at both ends of the story.
Both ends of the story, right? So worst case, best case
scenario.
Right. So anyway, to expand upon that.
So that's just relevant to what I wanted to say about this movie, and I think this is like directly from Tim Burton's brain. The movie is, it is actually about, I'm arguing that it's actually about Bruce and Batman, and it addresses both parts of his psychology outside of his own mind, right? The Penguin is a Circus Mirror of Bruce. He's orphaned, he's bitter, he wants vengeance for it, but Batman
against Gotham specifically.
But Batman does see something in him when he first looks at him. He says, I hope he finds them, addressing on the TV when he's talking about trying to find his parents. And at the end of the movie, when Penguin dies, Batman watches the Penguin die, and there's literally sadness and failure in his eyes. Like, that shot is not some just insert edit. It's literally Bruce like, oh, like, he's died, he's gone, right? Catwoman is a Circus Mirror of Batman. The dual personality, the mask, the identity. Bruce at the end removes his mask to save her from herself becoming only the mask, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is he tries to save them both and fails, right? More so than just the plot. He tries to save both of them and fails. The movie is really about Batman trying to save himself internally, happening externally, and failing.
Woo!
And that seems to me to come directly from everything we know about Tim Burton. There's a darkness there about the movie that's even more dark than just the normal stuff on the surface. Batman,
all of that.
Batman he might have stopped the Penguin army, and he might have stopped Gotham being destroyed and saved the kids, but he failed to save himself.
Yeah, wow.
So,
shit.
Yeah, that's my circus. That's the extension of Circus Mirror for me. What I got,
Bob, to support what you're saying, which I agree with. Max Schreck is also a Circus Mirror of Bruce Wayne.
Yes,
he is a billionaire who gets corrupted by his power and uses his money and status to directly harm the people of Gotham. And if Bruce makes all the wrong choices in his future,
he becomes Max Schreck.
In front of him, he becomes Max Schreck.
So literally
intentional.
He fails at saving every aspect of his personality in his own mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I think that I think that obviously there's an affinity for Catwoman, but I think there's an affinity for Penguin. And I mean, obviously Max Schreck and him don't have as many scenes, but like you said, it's hard to deny that Bruce knows exactly who he's talking to when he's talking to Max Schreck.
Right.
This is me. If
the
I became malicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the movie goes to great lengths to make us aware of that. Like,
Yes.
to your
Yeah.
point, that why I put We're the Same, You and I on there is because usually we have talked about this so many times. The Belloc versus Indy scene, We're
Right.
the Same, You and I. The Darth Vader versus Luke scene, you know, which we haven't talked about in Empire, but we reference it.
Right. Right.
You know, Join Me, you know, and I've never seen a movie that does it with multiple characters and does it multiple times.
No,
So,
like
yeah.
honestly, yeah, you could, like we just argued, there's 3 different internal aspects of Batman on screen happening.
Mhm.
And his quietness in the movie makes all of this ring more true for me, because it's literally like an external thing about Batman's internal person. Like,
It's
so we don't need as much Batman because we're literally
Yeah.
seeing what he's saying in his mind on the screen.
yeah, it's almost one day we'll do the Christmas Carol, and it's like, you know, that's like it's weird because it's the ghost of Christmas future, past, and present. You know, all are
Mhm.
on display for him in a way.
Right.
Yep,
all
they
movies-
absolutely are.
All movies kind of do that thematically. All movies are kind of a Christmas Carol. They just hide that into the subtext or whatever, and the plot actually is something different. Whereas Christmas Carol uses that as the plot.
No, like
in a weird sort of way.
Jamie, like literally the last thing I had written down for this point was, are these the 3 ghosts of Christmas
They are.
Yeah.
for Batman? Like
Yeah.
you said, like Max Schreck, Penguin, Catwoman. It's the 3 ghosts. There might not be past, present, future,
Right.
but
Right.
they're 3
Right.
ghosts showing him what he could have been, making wrong choices
Mhm.
from his
Or
circumstances,
and can still be
and can still be right.
going
It's-
forward.
So
any Batman conflict going forward from here,
He has
this
to
is
consider
imprinted
that.
in his mind of these three characters who all made the wrong choices and paid the price for them.
And it's funny, while I don't like the arguments, that makes me feel like it's so much a Christmas movie.
Oh, I
You
mean,
know what
how
I
can
mean?
you not say?
I know,
the
but
whole
you know
thing
what
takes
I know.
place on Christmas.
I know, but you know what I mean? Like the 3 ghosts of his
Yeah,
internal person are literally
Yeah.
haunting him in this movie.
yeah,
And that's what makes it like literally in the actual construction of it,
yeah, totally.
you know? So yeah, it's pretty incredible.
By design.
By design.
By design.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my circus mirror thing.
It's awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome. I mean, you hit on everything I wrote down, so I didn't even have
Awesome.
to say it. So that's
Sweet.
awesome. Yeah.
Great mind.
Yeah, and I think I had a thing about complexity of characters, and I'll just skim over it because
Sure.
I think what you said hits pretty much a lot of the stuff I wanted to say. But I do think that's what's interesting about this movie is it is a 3-hander, and if you have a 3-hander, then each of your 3 has to have the full-on potential for learning and arc. Not necessarily that they are going to learn an arc, but they need to struggle with some idea within the movie. So you have 3 characters that have a flaw, that their flaw indicates some want, that there's something that could probably heal them if they chose to accept it, a need. And usually they have a shard of glass, which is an origin story for the flaw. And all 3 of these characters have those things. So I think in a 3-hander, the key is the arcs. That's how you can tell a 3-hander from just a movie with 1 person and 2 supporting characters. In a 3-hander, each one has to have all those things and then wrestle with those things, wrestle with their flaws within the movie. And this movie does that really well.
Mhm.
Neither of the 2 villains are ever fully villains, you know, before the 3rd act, right?
Mhm.
Like there's even hope for the Penguin
Yeah.
Mhm.
until, you know, yeah. Like that it there's the fact that there's sympathy. There's a lot of sympathy there for everybody is what I think makes this movie a little more unique and a little different than some of the superhero movies we get now.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot of sympathy for the two of them. But yeah, did you guys have anything else
on that
on that
topic?
stuff?
No.
Okay.
No.
Let's talk about the whiteboard. We've addressed this
Woo.
quite often in
Yeah,
this show.
It's been a while, so I'm excited to bring it back.
Sure.
To me, this is another area where this movie shines. And Jamie, join me in this talk of the whiteboard. So I'll start it, and you can pick it up. So this whole show is a monument to the whiteboard. To like writers' blockbusters, basically, is a giant, all of us bowing down to the power of idea generation and craft. And when you're first starting out, part of your job is to basically come up with as many ideas for your script as possible and then whittle them down. And we have talked in many episodes of how like Indiana Jones, the whiteboarding session, a lot of the stuff that they came up with it in their whiteboarding session didn't get used in the first movie, but it ended up being in the second and pieces of the third and even pieces of the fourth. And same goes for Star Wars. Same goes for Terminator. The T-1000 liquid metal he came up with that in the whiteboarding session for Terminator 1, but he knew he couldn't do it, so he just saved it. And then when he got to do a sequel, he brought back that whiteboard material, that idea generation that was so good, but just didn't have a place in the current movie. And so
sometimes VFX just help you save it for later.
Yes, right? Save it for later.
Like the minecart chase in Temple of Doom, right?
Exactly. That was it. They came up with that for part 1.
Yeah.
Yes. So by whiteboard, Jamie, what else is a good way to describe it?
No, I think you hit it. I think what's unusual about this movie, and it's instructive to writers, maybe, or there's some inspiration they can take, is most movies like this, their whiteboard would be filled of stuff simply from the comic books, right? They just go on a deep dive through Batman through the past and come up with all the cool little scenes and exact panels they wanted to replicate and all these kind of member-berry type things, but also things that just the comics exploited and Batman and the Penguin and things from years to come. I think what's interesting about this movie is there's a little bit of that. This movie certainly honors, in my opinion, those Catwoman and Penguin and stuff. It doesn't completely, like, I actually don't like the new Batman Penguin. Like he's just a crime boss. I'm like, I don't care about. I wish
he's a Sopranos character, right?
Yeah, just call him something else. Leave the Penguin to something else. But I feel like this movie totally honors it and maybe brings it in a real world sort of way, and that sort of works. But to me, the whiteboard session here is mixing the Burton tone and the Burton loves with Batman. It's that mixture of the palette that we'll talk about in a second. And I think it's filled with that kind of stuff. And that's what, to me, and I think this speaks to Tim Burton's, I don't just want to redo the same thing. I don't just want to go back on the same material. I want to do something new and something different. And I think his new and different is stuff from his imagination that he's really bringing to the table, along with his writer.
Yeah. So to that point, there's a very simple equation or recipe, however you want to describe it, to come up with ideas that are fresh and unique to your story. And that is, you figure out what your concept is, you can even put it in the form of a what if question. And then you figure out what your genre is, and that's its own paint. And you figure out what your tone is, and that's its own paint. And we call it premise paint. And then you also sometimes have a time setting that is specific. And here it's a Christmas time setting. So Christmas gets its own paint, right? So we have the Batman genre paint. We have the Burton tone paint. We have the Christmas time setting paint. All of these things can be used to paint, old stuff and make it new, familiar stuff and make it new, cliche stuff and make it new and fresh to the movie. And I just want to kind of go down the list and we can bounce off of each other of how this movie does that, right? I'll start like the first you're going to make a list of, okay, like what type of settings, what type of scenarios would you see in a movie that's a Batman Christmas movie, right? The Gotham tree lighting ceremony, right? It wouldn't just be any tree lighting ceremony. It would be the Gotham City tree. What does the Gotham City tree lighting ceremony look like? Well, there's going to be, instead of just a regular old like beauty queen tree lighter or whoever would be in charge of lighting the tree, there would be, in this movie, it's the Ice Princess. It's Gotham City's
Ice
Christmas themed, specifically Christmas themed tree lighter, right? And we're going to talk about her in another section in a couple minutes. Of course, there's going to be supervillain situations right within this tree lighting ceremony, because otherwise how would it be expressing a Batman Christmas movie? And how does the villain make its entrance? They use a Trojan horse trope and they paint it with Batman villain and Christmas paint, and it's a giant gift box that gets rolled in and it explodes with like a bunch of clowns on motorcycles.
Right.
I mean, that is how you take. So there's the Trojan horse trope, there's the Christmas Batman paint, and you put those two together, you get a giant gift box that we love to see because we are familiar with the Trojan horse, you know, but it's new and fresh and something we could only see in this movie.
Right.
You guys have more that you can think of?
I was gonna say one thing you could just go. The one thing that stems from this, Penguin is abandoned. He lives in a sewer and he grows up underneath of the Arctic exhibit of a zoo, which leads to everything that the Penguin uses and has is themed, and you can only see it in this movie. So
Yes.
It's always either circus themed or Arctic themed. Everything he has, from his umbrellas to his vehicles to his clothing, even to some degree, you know. So yeah,
all of that has its own whiteboard too. Yeah,
right. Like there is a Penguin whiteboard for Arctic world. Right? Like it literally everything you'd find in a zoo, he has at his disposal, and you will only see that stemming from him, right?
Right, and they absolutely took the time and made that fucking list. And we're
Right,
like, what could we see in the Arctic world? You know, they didn't just like sit down at a typewriter and start writing an Arctic world scene and figure it out. They fucking took the time, made a list, and then implemented it in.
You could argue the same thing for Catwoman, as in her premise paint is, what does a single woman living in the city have at her disposal in her apartment when she changes over to use? She has a sewing kit. She has materials.
Yeah.
She has the sewing needles for her hands. Like everything comes from that apartment. That at first it's very significant. She comes home, talks about how she isn't married. You know, she lives single. She has a bunch of crocheting everywhere. So all that stuff leads into her costume and her abilities, right?
It's organic.
Yeah,
yes.
She gets her claws from the sadness of her earlier lonely life. Right?
Yes, they did that process. Yeah. The some of my other favorites. What does a Batman and Catwoman confrontation look like in a Batman Christmas movie? Batman and Catwoman underneath the mistletoe. Right?
Under the mistletoe, and the way that they realize who they actually are is from looking at the mistletoe.
Yeah, and a Christmas specific scenario
is how they realize who they really are.
That's
right.
Yeah. The Penguin's list is absolutely a fucking penguin painted Batman Christmas painted naughty list. It's a fucking naughty list.
You could even argue, Jimmy, that he has a naughty list for the kids, but he also has a naughty list for Max that he put back together.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? He literally taped Max's naughty list back together.
He did. That's awesome. So there's two lists, but that's
two lists,
you know.
Yeah.
So they were like, okay, like how else can we have fun with the Penguin using Christmas paint? We'll give him a list full of kids who he wants to punish. It's a naughty list with Batman paint. It's great. So you already hit on the Arctic world. Yeah. So I just think if you want to understand what premise delivery is, right? So it's all about your job as a screenwriter when you're writing an arc plot. If you want to write anti-plot, you do whatever the fuck you want. Who cares?
Two little ones. One I need to mention because it's near and dear to my heart is Circus Freak. There's fire jugglers and stuff like that as his gang, and so there's some guys with torches juggling.
Yeah, the powers of all his minions are very circus specific.
They're all circus specific.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have guys with machine guns and doing stuff, or just fighting with baseball bats, but instead it's jugglers and guys on stilts and things like that are all part of his gang. And then my favorite one, and I'm not even sure where this fits, but it's just a good example. Like when he takes over Batman's car, in a lesser movie, in a lesser script, he's just at a computer or something with a joystick. Instead, he's in one of those cars, bouncing around, and
Jamie,
and that's just an example.
Jamie, that is like, it's not a criticism, but that's the only time in the movie where I'm like, everything else the Penguin has came from Arctic World, but I was like, they fashioned and molded a tiny little Batmobile for him to sit in it privately. I think that's okay because of the tonal scale and where this fits on the tonal scale. Yeah. But it's definitely hilarious that he went to the trouble to fashion a Batmobile ride out of it.
Yeah. That's like my favorite little thing in the whole movie is when they cut to him and he's bouncing around that stupid outside a Kmart car that we used to ride when we were kids.
Yeah, it's great.
But there's a saying that I don't know if I learned it from Jamie or where I learned it. Honestly, I don't know, but it really helps me conceptualize what premise delivery is. And that is that and I think it's appropriate for this episode, is that every movie is a snow globe. Every movie is this thing that you should be able to pick it up, shake it, and look at it and experience. And without doing that, you could never experience that anywhere else, in any movie, in anything. And so it's the idea that every one of your people, places, things, and scenarios, and even the dialogue that comes across the screen is something we can only get when we shake that snow globe, when we put that Blu-ray. It's world building, and how you get there is by using these paints, doing these exercises, coming up with an idea, and asking yourself, like, is it so specific that, and I say this all the time, but is it so specific that when you shake that snow globe, you see it in there and it belongs? Or or could it be seen in some other snow globe too? And if it can, then how can you make it more specific, right? And I think that's
sorry, Jay. I thought you were done.
No, I think that's what this movie does best.
No, it does. I was gonna say, this is the only movie where you can see a cat-themed person try to kill a bird and a bird-themed person try to kill a cat in the same scene. You know what I mean? Like, no other movie in existence has ever had that thing happen.
And it didn't just come naturally.
Tom and Jerry, the recent Tom and Jerry.
Oh wait, well, Tom and Jerry, right? The other masterpiece, Tom and Jerry.
But they did this exercise, right? They came up with that scenario and they workshopped it until they got to him with the cat on the bed picking it up, and her with the
bird or
they
mouse,
workshopped it. A lesser movie doesn't have those two things within them just having a scene together, right?
Right.
So this is just the scripts that I'm sent, and get your bingo cards ready because I read amateur scripts all day, every day. That is my job. And the scripts that I'm sent, 9 out of 10 people are not doing this. They're doing this once or twice. They're doing this for 5 pages here, 3 pages here. But I am generally reading a scene that could take place really in any movie. If I really, if I'm really asking myself, is this specific? I could see this scene in another movie. They're giving me characters I could see in other movies. They're giving me props I could see in other movies. They're giving me dialogue I could hear in other movies. They're not doing the work to hone in on what's special and unique, and using all the colors in their palette to make it unique. So it's this what I think you can learn as a screenwriter most from this movie is how it gives us ideas that we could only experience in the story world. So
there's only one Batman Returns. There'll only ever be one Batman Returns because nothing is like this movie. It's really odd. It's so odd.
That's why it's fucking great.
Yeah, that's why it's my favorite Batman movie. All right. Using repetition. I know we've covered this before.
Well, you skipped over premise pretzels, which is
Oh, premise
related to the
pretzels. Sorry.
whiteboard. Yes. No, that's
Sorry.
okay. That's
That was
okay.
it's a
So
whiteboard sub point. Sorry.
yes. So bouncing off of now that we've gone over the whiteboard, Jamie, do you want to kind of explain premise pretzels for the listeners, and then we'll
Yeah,
go into
sure.
it?
Yeah, premise pretzels, it's kind of a specific form of setup payoff to an extent,
Mhm.
but it's really premise related. So when you come up with like an interesting premise thing, the idea is you kind of use it at least 2 or 3 times in different ways by twisting and turning, by flipping it upside down, by doing the reverse. And it's funny because the way I originally came up, one of the ways when I didn't come up with this necessarily, everybody uses it. But the way I initially recognized it, I remember I was writing a script that was like Evil Dead at a horror convention. And it was kind of done like I had not Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell playing himself, kind of like I think happened in an actual movie where Bruce, I think They Call Me Bruce or something like that. This is before that, and it was like Bruce playing himself, and zombies were attacking, and this is just a way to give you an example. So you had Bruce fighting zombies, and then later on there was a scene where Bruce fought people dressed as zombies, right? And then and I just kept twisting it like that, and then later on it might be a bunch of people with fake weapons have to fight zombies, so the weapons aren't real, so you just kept turning and twisting like the scenarios that might happen. Later on you might get people they think are dressed as zombies but they're real, and that might be the other way you twist it. So this is a premise pretzel, is like a situation that could only happen in your movie, and you keep turning it, you keep spinning it, you keep reusing it, but from a different angle.
Exactly.
And that's what a premise pretzel is.
You have succinctly described it as one setup, many payoffs, and that is something that is so instructive because, like, when you're writing a screenplay, you only have 90 pages, right? Or 90 to 120 pages to fill with ideas. And sometimes the best way to take that giant whiteboard full of ideas and whittle it down is to say, well, I've got like these 5 really cool things. How can I do more cool things with just those 5 things, right? It's like what I put this on the talking points, Bob, is because it's like a whiteboard within a whiteboard.
Right.
So, and I think this movie does a great job because, again, when I read the amateur scripts, they never do that. There's a one setup, one payoff, right? There's not one setup, then we see that thing subverted and used in different and surprising ways all throughout the story. 20 pages later, it's being used again for something surprising. 20 pages later, it's being used again for something surprising. And so I think that's another thing that you can learn that, like, Batman Returns, the script does so well. So I put these things on the list. I'm kind of just going to shout them out if you guys can remember some of the different ways that the movie uses this. So the Batmobile, the things we could see with the Batmobile.
I mean, that's just like just every single thing it can do, right? Is a whiteboard. Yeah.
Right. The side panels extend to thwart oncoming attackers. The engine fire kills the fire breather. That's my favorite one. right. The fire breather breathes fire at the Batmobile, and then the Batmobile breathes fire at the fire breather.
It can shed its sides to go through tiny corridors.
Yes.
Stuff like that.
It has the ability. It raises itself on a platform and turns around completely.
It can do a 360 in any position.
Yeah. And that's all they did was do a list and figure out, like, how can we play with this? The Batarang whiteboard. What does it do in the movie?
It has its own force of propulsion that he can actually set for where people are standing. Right?
Even the way he used it, that you miss scene where it's like you missed, he pulls the concrete out and knocks the guy in the head,
The dog,
different uses.
He throws it and the dog catches it like a bone.
Right.
The penguin then has it and uses it to frame Batman. Then Gordon has it, and it's on TV to show the audience that the entire Gotham is now assuming that Batman
did it,
responsible for this. So it's just a battering. We just listed like 6 ways they used one thing, right? Payoff.
It's like an insignificant
payoff,
weapon of his that is totally pivotal to the movie.
Yeah, they paid it off 5 times. The Ice Princess in a lesser movie, the Ice Princess is a one single moment throwaway character. In this movie, Penguin uses her to frame Batman, right, with the Batarang. Then he uses her as bait. Then Penguin kills her to frame Batman even further. Then her death makes Catwoman realize this guy fucking sucks.
Right.
And she's going to no longer be aligned with him, right? So they used her all throughout the story in different ways. They didn't just make her a throwaway one-line character. I mean, this goes for the umbrella whiteboard, right? Penguin's umbrellas.
Need we say more, right? It's like the umbrellas are perfect. Yeah.
All the different ways the duck vehicle is used. It's like, it pops up into the party. It floats down the river. It does like all these different things, right? It's not just a vehicle. Even Catwoman's stun gun has its own whiteboard, right? Like the clown uses it to subdue Selena. Selena uses it to destroy her answering machine. Then she uses it to give the kiss of death. I mean, this is, if you want to understand what we're talking about with premise pretzels and how to take an idea and use it in as many ways as possible, this movie is a great way to learn that concept. So, yeah.
No, it's great. So I think we could talk about just this for like another 20, 30 minutes.
I know.
We're not going to, but like just listing examples from this movie alone is nuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Using repetition. Now we've talked about this before.
Yes. Now I'm going to bring up just 3 examples because I think this is another craft thing that the movie does so well, and this is where I need your help on the first one, Bob.
Okay.
Because I don't have like encyclopedic knowledge of this. The first,
I didn't say I did either, but okay.
the first example I wanted to bring up is like sometimes it doesn't have to be throughout the whole movie where you can use repetition. Like it doesn't have to last for the duration of the story. It could just be quick, right?
Yeah.
One example is so backtracking a little, like one of the things that is a common problem when I read scripts is a writer wants to convey to the audience that the character is changing and either they're growing or they're descending, right? They're getting worse. And oftentimes the writer will give me stuff and they'll be like, see, on page 2, they were like this. And on page 70, now they're changed. They're different. And there's no way to understand why that is, but the writer thinks they've done it. Well, and then they go like, well, how can I convey what you're describing? Well, one way to simply help the audience understand how a character is changing or a scenario that they're in, situation they're in is getting better or worse, is to give us the exact same thing more than one time. And this movie has 3 really easy to learn from examples. The first one is Selena's apartment, and that's what I'm talking about, where it only has to be like 2 quick things. First time she goes to the apartment, we see her life, right? They set up the things that need fixing, how shitty her life is, right? The milk. What else is in there, Bob?
The milk, the crocheting, the hello there sign.
The hello there sign.
The answering machine.
And all the messages and how she responds to them.
Her apartment
is also...
The apartment is very suffocatingly small. Right? Like she has to pull her bed down and everything. Like it's a pathetic tiny apartment in a big city, right? Yeah. For a single woman, right?
And they use it to highlight all the different ways that like her life, all the different problems in her life,
the shortcomings that she has with her life.
Yeah, besides her job.
Right, which is pretty awful too, right?
Yeah.
Pretty terrible.
We already got the before world in her job.
Right.
Then after she gets basically this supernatural empowerment from the cats.
Right.
She comes home and everything's shot the same, everything's lit the same. They probably did it on the same day in the shoot. On the page, it probably reads very similar in its description, but they give us the exact same her coming home scenario. And then they use what they set up and all those little things that you just described to show us how her supernatural power, it has changed her, right? They didn't just be like, she is supernatural. They literally showed us all the different things that we already saw the last time with the Catwoman version of her, right? Like she just like fucking so
she claws up the walls and
yeah,
you know, she breaks the sign so it says hell.
a little bit
right?
hell here, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's hell here, right?
Yeah,
she's basically destroying the apartment as a way almost. I don't want to be too lofty here, but she's clawing her way out of her old self.
That's perfect. That's true. She's spray painting
right?
all the pink stuff black.
She's defiling it. Yeah, giving it more personality, giving it her new look and her new attitude.
Yeah, and even the way that the cats respond to her is different than how they did in the first one, right? She was serving them, now they're serving her.
She's now the queen when she wasn't before.
So it's just, this is a great example of like that's how you show an audience very simply that a character is changing. You literally give us the same thing twice.
Yeah,
and that's all you need. Okay, so the second thing is, and it's the most obvious one and my favorite one, is the mistletoe repetition, which is the first time it's Batman and Catwoman under the mistletoe, and he says, "A kiss under the mistletoe. Mistletoe can be deadly if you eat it," and she says, "But a kiss can be even deadlier if you mean it." Right. Now they're burying that eventual payoff. That's another thing I love, right? They bury it. The middle one is now they reverse it, right? They're under the mistletoe, they're unmasked. And Selena says Batman's line, and Batman says Selena's line, and that's how they know who each other are. Like, what an amazing bit of premise delivery and writing and craft. And then the third repetition, it's not the same exact scenario, but it sort of is when Selena says to Max, you know, she gives the kiss of death, and she says, "How about a kiss, Santa Claus?" You know, and so, but that is only a great payoff because of those other two mistletoe.
Yeah, they established that there's a kissing theme throughout,
right? And she says, you know, like it can be, you know, her original line is, "A kiss can be deadlier if you mean it," you know, and then she gives a deadly kiss. So it's just great writing,
right?
And again, they use that repetition to show us how the scenario is changing, right? It's a descent. She won. She got vengeance, but I guess she's still around in the end. That's true.
No, she lives. I mean, this movie does end on a teaser, sort of, but it's very elegant and tasteful.
That's true. That's a good point.
And you know what I like about that? Not that this has anything to do with repetition, Jimmy, but we only see her stand back up and she never turns around to show her face. And what I like about that, kind of with what I was talking about earlier, is Batman failing. She is fully Catwoman now.
Yes, that's
You
great.
can't see Selena's face. You can only see Catwoman's silhouette.
She is the mask now.
Yeah, she is the mask. She has fully transitioned to be Catwoman now.
That's a great way to put
it. He lost her completely, and thus the fight to lose himself continues, right?
We're gonna get into that in a second.
Right. That's how I was trying to transition, man.
I know. I got one more though.
Okay, go for it.
My favorite one, because it's not so subtle, but I think it's easy. The bridge, which is this is another scenario repetition, and like I said, it's not one that needs to be repeated over and over. It could just be a 1-2 punch before and after, and there's a nice before and after snapshot with Oswald's life, which is when we meet him as a baby. Like, his parents dump him into the river off of this bridge in the basket, and then in his dark night of the soul, with his storyline and log line, when he's being chased by the cops, he runs to the same bridge and he jumps into the same body of water to escape, you know, the cops. And that's sort of like when he's like doubling down on the fact that he's not going to be a part of society. And
it's not even just that. You could count his death. I mean, he's born into the sewer, right? Like they throw him into the sewer, and then he dies going back into the water of the sewer.
Yep.
The penguins push him in,
so it's a great,
and they know to do it too. Like they know,
right?
You know what I mean? But
So
like that's thematic. His birth
that's how
and to his death.
That's how we connect with those moments deeper.
Yeah.
That's how you deepen your scenes, right? By keeping that running repetition going. So
he was born a human, and then the animals push him back to where the humans threw him. It's like, come on. I mean, it's like right there.
Yeah.
Right. You know. Okay. So, Bruce, does he have a whiff of change? I believe this is Jamie's question.
It's my question, but it's Jamie's.
Yeah,
it's Jamie's thing.
So I'll just give you a quick what the whiff of change is. So in my book on TV, Save the Cat Writes for TV, I suggest that that in TV pilots you need something called a whiff of change in the pilot. Keep in mind in TV, you can't change a character too much. Like if you change the character every episode, it'd be the most whiplashy thing ever. Like every episode they learn a new lesson and they're back and forth and zig and zag. And then there's some shows where you can't change them at all, really, because the conflict is the function of some flaw in the character or some kind of thing. That's
Seinfeld.
Right. If you change I mean, maybe The Simpsons have changed over the years or South Park, but if you change them too much in any one season or something, it would ruin the comedy to an extent. It just wouldn't make sense. But my suggestion is in a pilot, if you write an original pilot and it's a strategy, is characters should have a whiff of change. We should see a glimpse that they're capable of change. We should see that the idea might be somewhere in the back of their head, that they're thinking about it, that there's something there that they don't accept 100% the flawed life they live in. There's some glimmer of hope, whether they choose to ignore it or not, or whether they're like, that's too hard, or I can't do that. There's some whiff of change. There's something that we know that if we watch enough episodes with this character, they're going to have to wrestle with this idea, and they're either going to have to change or kind of die trying. And that's what the whiff of change is. And the question posed by Jimmy was, does Bruce have a whiff of change? Because maybe he doesn't have a character arc, because it's a character that we need to kind of keep steady for, dozens of movies in the future. And we don't want him, to change in every episode. But is there like, did they do the TV trick? Did they give him a whiff of change in this movie? What do you think?
I will just say the reason that I brought this up is I can't remember what episode it was on, but you mentioned that superhero movies characters function more like a TV character because it's such an iconic role with a set of character, of a character makeup that you can't do too much with the character, but you can give them a little bit of change, right?
And also it's the nature of the medium of sequels that they're probably looking for, that they don't want to change them too much. So you could have another movie where they do pretty much the same thing again.
Yeah. And we've talked about how Mission of Ethan Hunt is very much a superhero rather than an actual real character. And he has whiffs of change throughout the movies. So yeah, that's why I brought it up. I don't have an answer here. I wanted to hear what you guys would say.
I mean, I like from the jumping off point of what I said about the three ghosts and, internal stuff. I think that there's a whiff, but it's not much. I think it's more him wrestling with himself and he might realize a little bit more about himself by the end of the movie, but it really feels like he's, I don't know, he's not a different person.
Yeah.
By much,
It's almost like he sees the dangers of what he is in other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He kind of knows that. And, but he doesn't take the effort to actually go and change who he is. So here's the question with character arc, right? It's, does he do something at the end of this movie he wouldn't have done at the beginning of this movie?
Right.
And does he?
The only thing that's different is it seems like he is someone who has shut himself off to the idea that he could be in a relationship with somebody. And I think by the end, he's yearning
to have Selena back.
to have a relationship,
Right.
maybe specifically because of what's unique about her that's similar to him.
Yeah. But
Also, with that, he's willing to bend on crime a little bit for his own feelings, which is probably something he wasn't ever thinking before Selena came in the picture.
He definitely humanizes her in a way he doesn't his other
he
foes.
Tries to understand why she would be how she is, and then because of his love. And for Batman, that's a big deal because his crusade is fighting crime to avenge in a vengeance for his parents.
Right.
So the fact that he would change a little bit,
there's a bit of a double standard there.
Yeah, it's a little double standard, but it's a whiff.
It does
That's
break.
A whiff.
It breaks his deal breaker. It does.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the key to the whiff of change is it's a little door ajar to the idea. It's not a full on like, I'm going to do crime now or something, or I'm all about getting married or, whatever. It's just more a little door opening,
it's a seed, right? Like Selena plants a seed in him. Like, okay, if I'm willing to understand her and there is good there, then maybe what am I doing? Hope. Maybe there's hope for everyone.
Yeah.
Including himself.
Including himself. And maybe you could kind of see that in the end shot with him in the alley and the cat and everything. But they don't say it. I don't think they say it directly outright or anything.
We're definitely reaching there, but
we're reaching
there. It is there.
It feels like it's there, right?
You feel it, and sometimes we talk about when it's not so on the nose. Do you feel it? And I think all three of us do feel it. That's why we're saying that. So.
I think that I think it's light enough that the people who aren't willing to go with the movie never would give it.
Right.
Would never see that. They checked out
emotionally way before that.
Way before.
The absurdity didn't.
The absurdity, yeah. But since we're all three of us are willing to give it that time, yes, I think it is there.
Intentionally so.
Intentionally, yeah. But it's not much. I mean, I don't think Batman comes out as another person, really. I wouldn't say that.
No, but
what Jamie said before, it's like kind of another Batman adventure. In that way, you just like next week, there is like
that's and you validated Jamie when you said that's exactly kind of the most we could hope for from the movie, like because they want to keep telling stories, so they got to leave it open, and that's how you leave it open,
And there's I wonder. I would love to hear Tim Burton just talk about the character of Batman from this movie the most and why he's so quiet and immobile in his emotions in this movie, which doesn't bother me as we've talked about, but he is. It's not like it doesn't feel like it's Batman exploding in any way in this movie. It's like him thinking the whole time. He literally starts the movie. Guys, he starts the movie with like in the thinker's position, and then the bat symbol comes up, and he's like, "Oh, right!" Like that's how the movie starts. That's got to be somewhat thematically connected to what we're talking about.
Totally.
The movie, like he's like in thought, and then, "Oh, right, I'm Batman. Let me go do that."
Yeah,
that's literally what happens. It's the first shot of him. So
that was my favorite thing to ask. That I was excited to talk about.
It's a weird topic, but it's I think that's honestly what I've heard from my friends that are comic book Batman fans. That's their biggest problem with this movie is that a whiff ain't enough. They want more of his internal, like more overt, straightforward Batman dealing with things on the surface, I think is what they want. They want more Batman.
Gotcha.
I don't know. I tried to argue that it was already there with the
it
three.
Is. Yeah. I think so.
It's just not Bruce saying it. It's not Bruce going, "Hey, you're like this part of my personality. You're like this part of my personality." That's a worse movie.
I didn't put it on the talking points, but they are all window characters into Bruce's psyche, like as you've described in a So
no, it's that's the whiff of change is hard on this one. Yeah. Maybe if we ever do we ever do 89, we'll talk about that again.
Ooh.
And see how it tracks for 89. I think that's everything, guys.
It is
for Batman Returns. our last episode. This is our last episode of 2023.
Yes, we managed 21 episodes this year, guys.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
Damn.
We only had a few scheduling snafus, but we did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for everyone that supported us this year. This is the first full year of this new stream too, like us being our own show.
Yeah.
I believe, right? Because we started as a new stream in last year. So thank you for everyone for supporting our move.
Yes.
Since then.
And if you have any questions, we didn't do a listener question this week because there was just too much to talk about on this.
Right.
Talking points were massive. But if you have a question about screenwriting in general, topics you'd like us to answer for you, topics about this movie that we didn't discuss, hit us up at writersblockbusterspodcast@gmail.com.
Yep. And did you have anything else you wanted to add? Jimmy, anything?
No.
Jamie, you don't want to plug?
Yeah, you don't want to plug the
plug
trailer?
I was thinking more about Batman Returns. Yeah, so I do have my movie that I directed a couple years ago is finally coming out. It's coming out January 16th. It's called Last Night at Terrace Lanes, and if you Google, you'll find the trailer and things like that. It's a bowling alley horror movie, as might be implied a little bit there. I mean, it could also be like a Tarantino ripoff of some bowling alley, something, I don't know, Coen Brothers, something. But no, it's a horror movie. Check it out. It's coming out January 16th. It's going to be on all the usual, rent it. I think it's like $9.95 on iTunes or something. So if you listen to the podcast, if you check it out, go share it around, tell your friends, because it definitely will be a word of mouth kind of thing to get out there. If we want enough attention to get like a good Blu-ray or something like that in the future, we need some people to kind of champion it and get people to rent it. So please do.
Last Night at Terrace Lanes.
Last Night at Terrace Lanes.
And I also, because Jamie also didn't want to plug it we just did It's a Wonderful Life for anyone who didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie has 2 Christmas feature films that he wrote that are also out there available for streaming. Last year they were on Hulu. This year they're on Paramount Plus, right, Jamie?
Yeah, I think that's we talked about this last week, right?
We did,
Paramount Plus. Yeah, they've been stuck in the Paramount Plus land. They used to just appear on Nickelodeon, but go check them out in Paramount Plus.
What's the titles? The Tiny Christmas and Santa
Tiny
Hunters?
Christmas and Santa Hunters are both on Paramount Plus.
And Two Front Teeth is on YouTube.
Two Front Teeth you can go check out right now on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a really here's the funny thing. We are in talks with some people to do like a better release of Two Front Teeth next year.
Hell yeah, dude.
Awesome.
Yeah, some people reached out and they were like, they can take tapes, like, because they're on the old, mini tapes, or that's what that was edited and shot on and stored. But they're a company that takes those and kind of remasters it, gives it a color correction, redoes the sound, does some new artwork and puts it back out.
Holy shit.
Can you put the Red Letter Media quote on the cover or the
I hope
poster?
so. I hope so. That's a great idea. I'm going to tell them to do that. Yeah, that's a great idea. We're just in talks. They reached out to me a while ago, but I was like, do we even still have the tapes? Like, that was my problem.
Oh, wow.
And it turns out it looks like we do. So
nice.
So maybe next Christmas I can plug that.
So it's going to get like a Star Trek: The Next Generation type makeover where they go back and just re-import all the original film. No, it looks great. It's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We're gonna put some all new AI scenes in.
Yeah. That's what you need. Special edition.
That means we get to hear Jamie's Santa Claus impression in the actual movie.
You can go watch that right now. They'll probably take that out for the re-release and put a real Santa Claus voice. But it's going to be cool. I'm gonna put some banthas in it. I'm gonna put some banthas in the background. That's my plan.
So while you can go watch the theatrical version, the theatrical cut of Two Front Teeth before the Snyder cut later on.
the truth is, as soon as they kind of give it the green light, I'll probably shut that down for next Christmas. So you have to go and get.
That's what I'm saying. Hurry! Yeah. The theatrical cut's only going to be available for so long.
Most of the comments on the YouTube channel is, isn't there a better version of this than this shitty version on YouTube? Like that's 90% of the comments. It's just like asking me for a better version. It's like, why do I have to watch this shitty version? I'm like, I think this is how sad it is. But somebody illegally put it up, and I think I downloaded theirs, and then I told them to cease and desist, and then I put that one back up.
That's amazing.
I think that's what happened.
You heard it here.
There you go. So I was like cease and desist, and I just copied theirs because that was all I had on hand, and I wanted people to be able to watch it. So,
incredible.
Yep.
Well, I think that's everything, guys.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, and
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Go watch It's a Wonderful Life and have a Merry Christmas.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.